everyone, welcome to Watercolor Wednesday. This is Kendra Krebs. I am the guest artist this week, and I am coming to you to show you a really fun frame that I made using a whole bunch of stamps that I just kind of grabbed. I wanted to challenge myself and just see what I could make by grabbing things that I wouldn't normally grab. So let me just show you what I used for this. Now, I do have a whole bunch of sets just because I wanted to keep it kind of random. So definitely use what you have, but this is just what I used. So I used Thinking of You in the Watercolor Sentiment set. I used this little bird from the Bird Bath set. I used these cobblestones from the Cobblestone set. This rock wall from the Watercolor Wall Texture set. These little flowers from the Watercolor Mini Flower set. I used this branch from the Watercolor Branches set. And the little ivy foliage stamps along with the this little branch here. And the teeny tiny grass from the, the previous one was the foliage set 2. And the teeny tiny grass from the foliage set 1. And I also used the daisy bunch from flower set 1. And that's it. So let's go ahead and get started here. So I did previously stamp this, the Thinking of You, and I stamped it using number 86 African Violet so that I can go through in the end and just add a little bit of water. I wanted to keep that nice and consistent. And then I've got my watercolor palette here, I've got my brush, and let's get started. So this watercolor paper, I cut it down to 4.5 by 4.5 to keep it a square. And then to make it really simple, instead of having to tape it off, I actually just used a little Post-it note, and this is a standard size Post-it note, and you can just kind of stick that on here. Even though this sort of comes up, you'll find that as you get going, when these edges become wet, they actually stick down, so that's really helpful. So I put this on and just make sure that top is nice and stuck here. And I'm going to start with this little stone wall. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to use a combination that probably most of you are familiar with, the 45 Sepia and the 86 African Violet. I love this combo and we use this a lot to get that really pretty gray. Now, I want to just tell you on this wall, you do not have to be perfect. This whole project is not about perfection. And as a matter of fact, the technique is not about perfection. It's about a loose looking watercolor because that's what watercolor traditionally looks like. So I've got my first one in, I just stamped that in. And then for the second one, I'm just gonna come in and stamp that kind of right next to it. And it's okay to have open space here. It doesn't matter, that's fine. This is just gonna be kind of a little pillar on the side. And actually these open spaces, these are gonna be filled with ivy and vines, so don't worry about it. If you wanna use the stamp positioner and make sure you get it nice and perfectly straight, by all means use that. You certainly don't have to on that part though. And I will show you how to use that stamp positioner as we continue with the project. So now I'm going to take my brush, I got just a little bit of water, and I'm going to go in between these little stones. I don't even have to go in between all of them because I am going to put that greenery in, but just a little bit in here. And all I'm doing, I didn't grab any color, I just am using the existing color in the stamp that I put on the stamp by blending that 45 and the 86. So I'm just very light-handedly coming through. Now keep in mind that 86 African Violet is really intense, right? Most of you know that if you've used this color. So just keep a very light hand and you're just gonna come in and just pull this color out. Now, what's really fun about when you mix these colors is you're gonna get different gradients. You're gonna get some areas that are more gray, some areas that are more blue, and some that are more brown. But I absolutely love that. So I do that often. And I'm just gonna continue down here. I'm not gonna overthink this. I'm just gonna kind of get that in. And now you can see these stones are actually sort of popping forward now, right? Because we've darkened, we've given it contrast behind. So that really pops those light stones forward. So we'll get that water in, and then we will continue, and we will put in some little ivy in here now. So I'm gonna take my ivy, just gonna grab that real quick, and we're gonna put this on the block, and I'm gonna use number 15 olive green, and I'm just gonna ink this. And you know, I'm not gonna be extra careful here because ivy grows where it wants to, right? It's just like all the other foliage. It grows where it wants to, and you don't have to be ultra careful here. We just wanna get these in to give that illusion of crawling greenery kind of going up that pillar. And I'm just gonna stamp these in. And now I'm gonna do the same thing using the 72 pine green. So I'm gonna go in with 72 pine green, and I'll just use that same stamp. Notice I'm only coloring certain areas to make the stamp look different every time. So maybe this time I'm just gonna ink that center area, and then maybe next time I'll do the tip. Just to give the illusion that this is free-handed as opposed to stamped. And it just gives a really loose look. Doesn't look so stampy. Okay, so now I'm gonna take my brush and I'm just going to dab. Now, if you've kind of learned this technique with us for a while, you know this is one of the most common, most important ways of adding water. It's dabbing. So you just want to continue to dab along those leaves. Now notice I'm leaving the stamp image. That's okay. Come out of the lines. You want to come out of those lines, because if you stay within the line, it can still sometimes look like a stamp, right? So we really want to pull that color out. And you can see we're getting a nice sort of greenery look here as these leaves sort of crawl up this pillar. Okay. And because I stamped this rock wall portion first, this is going to be a little bit darker down here, which is kind of nice because you get a nice gradation of color as it comes down. So you've got the lighter up in this corner, and as you come down, it gets a little bit darker. And also, I want to point out, this is very important, that you bring your color all the way to the line of the Post-it note. If you don't bring it all the way over, you're not going to get a sharp line on that frame. And you really want to make sure you get that sharp line, because that's what gives you that nice square look, okay? So now we're going to move on to the tree in the upper right hand corner. So I'm going to grab my branches from the branch set and number 45 sepia, and I'm just going to ink this branch and just start stamping these in. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to put a whole bunch of leaves in here, so you can just have at it with this. But I would say keep them in the kind of going in the same general direction. If I were to stamp the branches back this way, I would need a source over here. I'd need a trunk or something where those branches are going to be coming from, right? So let's make sure that they are coming from the same source. So I'm just going to stamp those in there. I'm just going to get a few of them. And I am going to now grab my vine or my little sprig or these little leaves or what have you. And I'm going to use number 15 olive green again. I love this green. Just going to ink those leaves and start stamping these right along the areas that I stamped the branches. Now, once again, we want to come right up to this line because that's what's going to give us that nice structured line for our frame. Now, I know I showed you the frame with the writing in it. You could easily cut that out. You could cut that out and put a photo of somebody or something in there, and that would be so darling. this is just the way that we're showing you, and we hope that this inspires you to be super creative and try something new. And definitely tag us on Instagram, #ArtImpressions rubber stamps, or watercolor, Art Impressions watercolor, anything, or watercolor the Art Impressions way. You can hashtag all of those and we'll see it. So definitely, if you try this, for sure tag us. We love seeing your work on Instagram and Facebook. I know a lot of you guys do tag us and we do share your work. So we just so appreciate you trying out our ideas, and we'd love to see those. So now I'm going to continue with my brush, and once again I'm going to dab. Now a really great way to remember when to dab or when to use a straight stroke is if the image has primarily straight lines, like maybe a pot, you would want to use a straight stroke. And if the image has primarily leaves or flowers or anything that's not a straight line, you would want to use a dabbing motion. And that is a pretty easy way to sort of decipher how to add your water. So I'm just dabbing because most of these leaves are not straight lines, right? Although I do have the branch in there, I am primarily focused on those leaves. So the branch is in there just for some structure and to kind of guide me. And also I love that sepia. So I really wanted that sepia in there too. Okay, so now I've got my tree in the corner here, and I want to add a little bit of sky just up in here just to get that sky going. So I'm going to take my palette and I'm going to use number 17 Steel Blue. So 17 Steel Blue, and I'm just going to color that right onto the palette, and I'm going to grab some of that blue and just kind of dab it in right along the edge of that Post-it, because I want that nice solid line. So I'm going to come up in here, and if you feel like, ooh, that blue is a little too dark, you can just grab your water and wash it out a little bit. But I really like kind of doing this dabbing motion with the sky because it gives you a little bit of texture in the sky, because the sky is never perfectly blue, right? It's got some lighter areas, some highlights, maybe some clouds, some darker areas. So definitely just dab that in. It's kind of a nice way to put in your sky to avoid those harsh straight lines that a lot of us do naturally, which isn't wrong. But this will give you a little bit more of a realistic looking sky. Okay. So now I'm going to take my flowers. So I'm going to use that bow, that little pine bow, this one from the Foliage Set 2. And I'm going to use my 86 African Violet. And now I'm going to start putting in some flowers. So let's get that guy to stick. And I love using foliage as flowers. I think it's really fun. And it gives you a different use for your stamp. It just kind of shows you that you've got a lot of variability in use with these stamps. So they can go as far as your imagination. And I'm just going to keep stamping these across, and I'll stamp some over here and a few more over here. Okay, so I've got my horizon line now across the bottom. And that's really, really important because it kind of gives structure to your whole image. Now I'm just going to dab, right? Because these are mostly leaves. And we'll dab over here as well. Push that down, go right up to the line of that Post-it. Okay. So now I'm going to put in my my little stone walkway, and I definitely want to use my stamp positioner for this. This is a must do for these walkways. I have gotten these crooked so many times that now I just go and grab my positioner because that's what it's for. So let's grab that and I will show you how to use it. I'm just going to move this out of the way for a moment. And I'm going to take my stamp positioner. It comes with this clear inset piece, and then you've got your positioner here. So I've got my my stone ground walkway, and I'm going to use that really nice gray mix of sepia and 86 African Violet. So I'm going to use these two, and just, I'm going to do 45, oh, I'm sorry, 86 and 45 sepia. So I'm just going to put it in here. I'll go this way this time. So I'm just going to stamp it right on inside. And now I've got my image right here, so I can move this away. And I will grab my image. And since I stamped it to the side, I'm going to, this is how it normally is, I'm just going to turn it and put my walkway right there. That's exactly where I want it. So I'm going to take my positioner again and put it right there. And I'm going to re-ink my stamp, 45 and 86. And then I am going to hold that very tight, and we'll put in our walkway, just like that. So now it's nice and straight. I can move this out of the way, and I'll turn this back straight. So now I have my walkway. I'm going to take my brush, and I'm just going to start pulling a little bit of this out. I don't need a whole bunch. I'm going to go back in with the sepia for this and just put a little bit of brown into the stones. So I'm just going to just lightly pull this a little bit out, and then I'll just drag this down. A little bit of a drag here. And I have a wet brush. So I'll bring that down. And then as this is dry, I'm going to start coming in with some teeny tiny grass. And that one is from the foliage set. So I'm going to grab that teeny tiny grass, and I'm going to use number 15 again. Again, you can use any colors you want, any stamps you want. This is just what I did. I literally was doing this, and I would just go and grab a stamp, and just whichever one I grabbed, I was going to use it, unless it was a stamp that certainly didn't go, like a lighthouse. Like the lighthouse wouldn't go with this, so I put that back. But, you know, there's a whole bunch of different stamps that you can use that maybe you just don't naturally gravitate towards immediately. And this is a really great exercise to challenge yourself and try something new, because that's the way that we expand our creativity. We continue to try new things, and don't be afraid to try new things, and don't be afraid to not absolutely fall in love with the first thing you make, and be prepared to fall in love with the first thing you make, because sometimes that happens too. That happens more often, I think, because we're just, I mean, it's such a fun technique, and you always make something really beautiful. So I'm going to take that grass now, and I'm just going to pull that grass. Now see, I'm using a straight stroke on these because most of these lines are straight, and I really just want to pull that grass out. Just going to pull that greenery out, and again, I'm not being super careful here. I'm just pulling this out because grass is going to grow where it wants. I can't tell grass where to grow or how to grow. So there's no right or wrong way. And I'm going to take now my daisy bunch from the flower set, and I'm going to ink this using, I'm going to push that down. Sometimes they move if they get dusty. If your stamps get dusty and they're moving, all you have to do is take a little wet wipe or a little baby wipe and just gently wipe off the backside, and it will feel like it's brand new again, which is really fun and kind of a nice, easy way to get some re-stickage going on. So I'm just gonna stamp these sort of in between the grassy areas. And again, I want to come all the way down to this line because I want a really nice tight frame. So I'm going to take that brush with the water and dab, because these don't have straight lines, right? So we're going to dab. And notice, once again, I know we've said this so many times, but when we're stamping flowers and foliage, we're stamping how many times? That's right, 5. So definitely stamp at least 5 times so that you get dark to light variation in your stamp. You get that nice highlight, and that really great shadow. So definitely make sure you're doing those. If you're getting a really dark, bold color every single time, you're probably inking just too many times. Okay, so now we're gonna take our little flower from the flower set 2, and I'm gonna use Prussian blue, number 29, and ink those little flowers, the little buds, and then 15 to ink the stem. And I'm going to pivot these. So I want these to be coming back to the same root system. So I want to pivot them, and that's traditionally how these little flowers would grow. These stemmed flowers is they would grow in a bouquet style. So you want to make sure that you're bringing them back to that same root system. It just makes it look the most realistic. And then I'll take my brush, and we only want to dab the blooms. We don't want to come down and dab those stems because the stems are so dainty, and you can see how much detail we've already taken out here. So let's welcome some of that detail back in the form of stems. So we'll leave those be, and if you put water on them, you'll quickly notice that they get really wide and disproportionate to your blooms. So just leave that off. And then for the final step on this outside portion before we go in and do the birdhouse and the bird is we're going to add that final bit of sky just in here, the same way we did to the top. So I'm just going to grab that same steel blue from my palette. I'm going to come all the way to this edge and go all the way to that edge. Now, if you're really wet, you might get some color leaking into your frame. So just kind of try to keep it relatively dry. It doesn't have to be too dry. And if it leaks in a little bit, well, you meant to. So don't worry about it. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna, I told you I would add some sepia to that little stone walkway. So I'm just gonna add a little bit in here just to add some depth into these stones. So like I said, I'm just gonna do a little bit. I don't need a whole bunch, but I kind of like that offset color. So now I'm going to take my paper off. See how the structure of the frame has stayed really tight? And that's because I brought the color all the way to the edge of that paper, okay? So now I'm going to put in my birdhouse. So we're gonna take, once again, the stamp positioner, and we are going to stamp our little birdhouse. I'm gonna move that again so I can put my birdhouse in here. And I'm gonna use my favorite mix, 45 and 86 again. 45 and 86. Sometimes I grab the Prussian blue on accident, and I love that combo too. That 45 and 29 is really beautiful as well. So you could go either. So I put my stamp on here now, and this is so great because you can just take that positioner and you decide where you want your little birdhouse to live. And mine's gonna live right there. So I'm going to take that positioner and put it back. I will re-ink this stamp again using 45 and 86. Like that. Stamp it in. Make sure you hold that positioner nice and steady. And I've got my little birdhouse perfectly aligned, exactly where I wanted it. And I'm just going to take my brush and pull out some of this color, just a little bit here. See, that 86 is really strong, so just kind of keep that in mind. I'm going to put a little shadow down there. And I'll grab some sepia off of my palette. A little bit of that sepia. I'll put it into the rooftop. And once again, I'm leaving highlights. It's okay to leave highlights. It's okay to not color the whole thing in. You actually don't want to do that because it makes it look flat. Your image will be very flat looking if you color everything in. So I'm gonna take my 86 African Violet and color a nice dark interior in. I'll put a little line right there just to add a nice shadow. And I'll take my brush again and just lightly pull that down. And I'm going to leave my birdhouse super simple. I'm not going to overdo my birdhouse. And I'm going to take that positioner. I love, actually, let's use this again for our bird. And then I'll come back and show you how I did the string for the birdhouse. So let's stamp our little bird on here. And I'm going to use 86 African Violet. I'm going to stamp him. This is our last step. This is our last step with the stamp. And then I will show you a couple more things before we wrap this up. But I'm going to put my little bird right here. I kind of like him right there. And I like it when it's offset. So when things are asymmetrical, that's actually more pleasing to the eye than doing it in the exact opposite spot. So if I would have put him like over right here, like in the exact opposite corner, that's actually less pleasing to the eye. So if you just put him, offset him just a little bit, you want to sort of keep looking at it. It adds more interest. So I'm going to grab that 86, ink him again, and stamp him in. He's right where I want him. And I will take my brush, and I'm just going to lightly pull some of his shadows out. And just keep him very simple. Put a little bit of that 17 in his breast. And just pull that in. Okay, so now let's place our little string up here. So I have my stamp positioner. Let's go this way. And I'm gonna line it up with my line down here from my Post-it note, and I'm just going to create a line that goes straight up from the piece that hangs. And I'm going to use 86, hold that there, and we'll just draw a little line up. And that's nice and straight because I lined it up. And then a little tie. And then what I like to do is, since I stamped Thinking of You in the water-based marker, the Marvy, I can actually come in and just soften this just a little bit to keep the consistency of the watercolor look, but to add just a little bit of water to that. So to get Thinking of You, I just stamped it. I colored the words just as though I colored any of these, and I stamped it down. So I got this really neat sort of blotchy look because it's done on the watercolor paper. So if you stamp like this on the watercolor paper on the textured side, you're gonna get a really nice uneven script, which I love. So there is that. And then to finish it off, I just mounted that onto white cardstock. So the most important thing is to sign your work, right? Always sign your work. And I thank you guys for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And once again, you could always just cut around these little guys and put a photo of somebody in here and frame it. So I hope you enjoyed this and keep stamping. Definitely subscribe to our channel for more Watercolor Wednesday videos, and have a great week. See you next time. Bye.